Socially responsible architecture is as much about sharing knowledge as it is about constructing houses. And when Sergio Palaroni took his classroom to the Yaqui Indian building site, it is debatable who learned more.
We brought 40 students from UT and 3 or 4 instructors and volunteers and students from their university locally were out here working with us. The first 24 hours were exciting because this wasn't originally where the houses were supposed to go. They were supposed to go on another site, so we had a lot of changes.
Reality intervened. It's kind of like life. They went back and found out, one of their clients had fallen behind in her commitment to the community. And so one of the clients had to be switched. The other thing that was discovered is that the soil conditions at the second site were not as anticipated, so that the footing design had to be changed.
The original foundation for the house in Estacion Corral was this deep, and this one is 90 centimeters.
Probably.
So up in here. So a lot of the money for these houses had to go into the foundation just because the soil was so soft.
What students are learning to do is to think on their feet, to understand that there's an interrelationship between social and political and economic and environmental variables that are always in flux. Right? So rather than design a pretty object, they're designing this process that's always in flux, kind of like the world, right?
We only teach them half the process in my mind. We only teach them about what happens here on the table, which is wonderful. It's dynamic and it's full of stuff, and full of the creative process. What we don't teach them about much is how do you make that creative process valued in the community? How do you take that creative process out on the street and engage the real problems of the world with it?
The students tend to work in indigenous technologies, vernacular technologies, and that's very important to the education of an architect. I think an architect who's done a straw bale house, for example, may in fact do a better high-rise.
When you're coming into this, I didn't know anything about construction, really. Besides sort of around the house kind of stuff, or an occasional weekend with a group at Habitat.
I think what these students are learning is a different kind of approach to problem solving, right? Because when you're simply going through the American Institute of Architects Handbook of Professional Practice and following the rules, I'm not sure that you're learning how to build a better building or a better world.
Part of being sustainable is not just the materials you use, but also the fact that there's a level of ownership by the community, because they're a part of that whole process. He doesn't finish the complete building, he sets up the system to allow the community to finish it, and by finishing that building, the community owns that building.
The problem that he has is that they're out of material money, and he's got 7 bags of concrete, and that's it. And all the concrete money went into the foundation.
Right. But he's got the sand and gravel outside.
He needs 17 bags of cement in order to do it the old way.
Well, he'll probably need 17 bags even if he does ferro cement. En medio yo te voy a hacer el diseño, vamos a poner Jay, yo y Conan, y hacerte el diseño de la capa de ferro cemento para que salga bien. I can't, with my students, come and build 1,000 houses that might be needed by a community, but we might build just a few pilot ones. But in those pilot ones, we'll reclaim the community's sense of ownership over their political, social process. So design can act not just to create new possibilities in how to live in the world, but it also can act and create possibilities of your political and social rights in this world.
Para los vecinos una admiración.
For his neighbors, it's really an admiration. I really admire it.
Porque la empezamos con un material que ya no se utiliza.
Because we built it with a material that now nobody uses, el adobe, ¿verdad?
El adobe.
Yeah, the adobe.
Y dijeron, este loco, ¿qué irá a hacer?
He said that they're used to brick and concrete, and they all said, what's this crazy guy going to do with all this adobe?
Ahora dicen, oh, qué color tan bonito, azul.
And now they say, hey, what a pretty color, that blue is great.
For us, what's sustainable about this, or what we're trying to achieve in sustainability, or what we call sustainability, is the idea that it's both the physical and cultural environment that we're trying to sustain. Like strong communities, it's been pointed out, sustain themselves because they engage the world, they engage each other. They have the capacity to do things for themselves. And so what we're doing here in Mexico is helping this community not only to have cheap energy and cooler houses and make better use of their land, but it's also the idea that the house reflects their use, reflects the way they live, reflects their traditional relationships, reassures them that the way they live is good, My dream of dreams would be that someday we would sit down with the government and the government would say, we think what you're doing is really good. And they're doing that in the sense that they're supporting this project among all the experiments that are going in the country. This is the one they have agreed to support. That's extraordinary. But then the next step might be for them to say, we not only want to support that, but we want to take the ideas that you're introducing and introduce them to the hundreds of thousands of houses we build in Mexico. And I think that those ideas can make a change in the way we do housing. And I think that would be extraordinary.
There's no doubt that change must happen. But when we think of poverty, we must also think about it in the so-called first world. In Sergio Pallarone's case, right in his own backyard at the University of Texas.
The whole region from 35, which divides the city east to west, all the way to the airport, is an area which is predominantly Hispanic and African American. And it's a community that earns a fraction of the income on the other side of the tracks. This is an immediate issue here that has a lot of parallels with Mexico. Here's a community that's marginalized. One of the things that has working for it is that they have this ground that they consider their own, but which is potentially going to be lost to economic development and higher taxes. So can we do anything to maintain them here?
With the Guadalupe project, Sergio challenged his students to not only design houses, but to develop strategies that strengthen the community.
I think that sustainability is about kind of crossing political and social boundaries. So my idea of the Guadalupe project is that it's like getting students to understand that unknown neighbor, that distant neighbor, as it was once put, that is, we share so much political and social boundaries with, but yet we so misunderstand.
They began by simply cleaning up one of the neighborhood alleys as a way of reaching out to the residents.
The reason that we chose the alley project is because we could actually intervene, like we could actually come here and do something that was noticeable in terms of cleaning it up and sort of saying, this is possible. There were ideas of like taking some of the branches that we clean up and making compost piles out of them, so that you could sort of suggest the more that you use the alley, the less the crime will be there. The more you're facing it and incorporating it into your life, the less it's something that somebody else can come in and abuse.
What's important, what I've seen in my 25 years in trying to organize my neighborhood, is these little small action projects lead to bigger changes in the neighborhood, and it gives people hope.
A volunteer came up to me yesterday in the alley and said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, we want to make the alley a more pleasant place, because if you notice right over there, there's a house under construction that faces the alley. So it becomes a new kind of pedestrian street. And if you look at the mapping information that we have, this alley and the one next over it each have 6 backyard lots that could have like mother-in-law or granny flats in it, which means that we would almost be able to double the density of the neighborhood, which is certainly something that's good for the city. But it would also be a good thing for the people in the neighborhood, because if they had access to something like a revolving fund and could borrow the money to build a granny flat here, it means that they could rent it out And instead of being pushed out of the neighborhood because of increasing taxes, they would actually have additional income.
The student housing designs, at their core, utilize systems to reduce running costs and minimize waste. By incorporating social, cultural, and environmental aspects into their designs, green and sustainable choices were not seen as luxuries, but basic building blocks.
This time next year we'll be building 2 houses in the alleys. So next year you'll see the same kind of thing, but in kind of like 12, 15 weeks of being out here building 2 houses, engaging the community, teaching them skills to how to build. At that point we'll actually be building maybe the entire alleys, you know, natural fencing, because what we imagine these fences to become eventually are like vertical gardens which kind of help cool the alley and bring moisture into the alley and help people raise tomatoes or other fruits or plants, and that they would actually be fed from the rooftops. So the end long-term impact would be that the alleys would become this kind of product of the natural environment, the water cycle, or the houses, and things like that. So they would be representative of the ecological potential.
Well, we're hoping to get some residents to actually come out. I mean, we did a lot of survey and canvas, and it would be really nice to see some people come out. We got a piñata, trying to, you know, make it a fiesta kind of a thing. Say, come on out, join us, see what we're doing, type of thing.
Austin is the kind of community that it has the kind of political and social awareness to make it happen, but maybe all the pieces, all the small solutions that have existed haven't been pulled together. And so we're going to be part of the kind of one of the weavers that's going to try to bring this together. And so, God, it's a great opportunity to teach students to kind of learn to be not just architects, but to be, you know, realize where the money might come from and how do you give them political rights and how do you find possibilities. How can you be a visionary that's, you know, inclusive of all issues and of all people?
So what is design's purpose? Is it responsible for great buildings, or possibly responsible for the greater good, allowing for the potential of all living things?
Who doesn't want clean alleys? And who doesn't want a place where every human being has a decent place to live? I don't think that anybody is ideologically opposed to those things. The issue is, how do we get there?
These global issues would only be solved by small solutions, small local solutions. So everyone says, what's the big answer? There is no big answer. There's millions of little ones.
It's nice that I can try to help a couple of families live in a nicer house or a better house that, you know, that improves their quality of life. But much more importantly to me is that you know, that forever it will change the way that I and 40 other students view the world and the way that they're going to practice architecture in the world.
If 1 out of every 100 architects did what Sergio did, there'd be a lot less suffering in the world, a lot less poverty, and a lot less people who are underserved in their communities. So, you know, I think he inspires all of us to think about how we might turn our skills to more altruistic ends.
Knowledge is a resource, and there's need for that resource, you know, a mile away from it, half a mile away from it. You know, that knowledge can make a difference in people's lives. And that's all we're saying. It's just, you know, walk across the tracks. Take your knowledge, the things you're learning, just apply it. Just walk 5 minutes, and you can make a difference.